The Polyglot Gathering is organized by Education at Internet.
Hello, everyone. Please take a seat. And a quick reminder to use Slido for your questions. You can scan this QR code to ask the questions. And a warm welcome to Charlotte and Leah for their talk about technology's impact on endangered and minority languages.
Okay, hello. I'm Charlotte.
I'm Leah.
And yeah, this is what we're going to talk to you about today. So we're going to talk about, technology's impact, but positive and negative on minority and endangered languages. And first, the reason we're doing this talk is we work for a company called uTalk. So we have a language learning app. And right now, we have almost 160 languages on the app. And what we found is the more languages we add, the more we're dealing with endangered minority languages, and the more we're finding these limitations at the edge of the technology that we're both using to produce the languages and put them in our app, and in the app itself and how we originally built it. And so we thought we would explore that a little bit more today and see, how some of the things that we use every day might be having these sort of negative impacts as well as the quite obvious positive ones. So what we're going to cover is 3 areas. Obviously, we can't cover everything. We don't have till the end of time. So we're going to look, first of all, at keyboards, both physical and virtual keyboards, because that's what we use more often now. Then we're going to talk about the internet and how that has had this kind of impact on languages, how languages might be sort of digitally affected. And then we're going to look at our newest big technology, which is generative AI. So we're looking at things like ChatGPT, and we're going to talk through how we can look at these other technologies and maybe stop making some of the mistakes we've made before. So, keyboards. So if we go to the history of keyboards, the first commercially available, really hugely available keyboards came with typewriters in the US at the end of the 1880s. And these were very quickly adopted by business. It's pretty clear to see why. They can help you enter information more easily. It's easy to read because you have a uniform typeface. It's easy to make copies. And with these typewriters came the QWERTY keyboard. So when we're dealing with Latin script languages, this keyboard or a variation of this keyboard is very often still used. That began in the 1880s. And the apocryphal story of why we have this layout, because it's not really that efficient. We find that in English, at least, many of the keys you use are all on the left-hand side. And most people are right-handed, so it doesn't really make sense that we would put it all on this side. The reason is supposed to be that it wouldn't make the hammers of the typewriter hit at the same time, but then this doesn't make sense when you think about where the letters are. So we're not quite sure why it's that layout, but it is. And then you find in other languages that use the Latin script, things like French, German, you just have variations of this layout. And that extends to places that have been colonized. Places like Vietnam use a variation of this keyboard. And this is an example of how market forces really affect adaptation of technology and not to the benefit of these languages. So, for example, in Turkey, there's a Turkish keyboard called the F keyboard. It's very good for typing in Turkish. It's very efficient. It's very useful. Most Turkish people will still use a QWERTY keyboard because it's easier to buy. It's easier to get this hardware. But they are more efficient, and in other languages, it's really been helpful. So things like Mandarin, Chinese, Japanese. I'm sure most of you have seen pictures of big old Chinese typewriters with too many buttons on to count. Having a pinyin input or a JIS input is much, much faster. It also has downsides. So you have things like character amnesia, which is where even if you are a proficient speaker of a language and you know the characters, you can recognize them, but you may not be able to produce them anymore when you're writing. And this isn't recent. This isn't like a phenomenon of texting. There are articles in Japan dating back to the 1980s when word processors became really widespread that this was even then affecting. So it's been 40 years that this has been affecting them. And the question then is what's going to happen in the future? In China, schools have already started implementing more calligraphy classes to stop children from being unable to write characters because it is important. So what measures can we take? And then when you have languages that don't have a standardized writing system at all, what is this doing to them if they don't have the hardware? There's also the pressure of Latinization, as for many languages where they don't have kind of the power to make their own keyboards, they will use a Latin alphabet. So you see this with like Arabic text speak, like ArabZZ. So modern standard Arabic has a standardized writing system, but it's not many people's native language, if any at all. It's varieties of Arabic, things like Egyptian Arabic, Levantine Arabic, Moroccan. So they'll use this Latinized version to text, because originally, obviously, you're only using like 9 keys. How is this going to impact in the future if these languages aren't standardized? And if the speakers don't necessarily want them to be, it's sort of what do we do about it? So these are all problems that, obviously, I'm talking about very large languages. The effects on minority endangered languages are multiplied. But things like virtual keyboards are increasing progress. They're quite easy to make. So you can then load them onto your phone, your computer, and you can use the physical keyboard you have or the virtual one on your phone to type in a new language. So it's not an endangered language, but for example, there's an initiative in Tamil to have a Tamil input keyboard, which they didn't have. So there are lots of languages where this would be helpful. But without having the full stack support, so without having the hardware, without having operating systems in these languages, Windows and Mac both only support about 50 languages each. And that's not even 100 languages overall, because they're probably almost the same. You can't use the technology in your language. So even if you can type something out, you're still having to go through a different medium to get there. So it's still impacting. The issue with your endangered languages is that they need to be used in all domains to remain alive, essentially, or to remain spoken. You need to be using them at home, at school, at work, with your technology. If we shrink these domains, the languages become more endangered. So we need this support at all levels in our technology in order for these languages to really survive. But yeah, with the more virtual things we have, the more progress we can make, the more we can sort of pressure companies to create these things that might be more useful.
Thank you. I'm going to talk to you a bit about the internet now. So the commercial internet as we know it kind of took shape in the 90s, and then, as we all know, it's completely transformed nearly every aspect of our lives. The internet's often portrayed as a sort of global equalizer, so a kind of digital commons where everyone can participate. However, this utopian vision that some people have of the internet overlooks something crucial, which is that the power of the internet to include is matched by its power to exclude. So we know that the internet offers unprecedented opportunities for communication, sharing knowledge, connecting. Communities that were once geographically isolated from each other can now communicate in ways that were unimaginable, like even 50 years ago. However, this big promise of connection and empowerment only becomes a reality if it includes you and your language. So today, there are over 5.5 billion users of the internet. And yet, according to Mark Davis, he should be on there, his name, I need to credit him, of the Unicode Consortium, nearly 98% of the world's living languages are digitally disadvantaged online. So that means there's just not enough resources available in those languages on the internet. And this essentially means that the vast majority of the world's linguistic diversity is excluded from meaningful digital participation. So we could say that the internet has this really vast reach, but its representation is really uneven. So languages with commercial and geopolitical power dominate, while others are barely visible at all. And exclusion from these spaces could mean exclusion from the future as the internet just becomes more and more prevalent in all areas of our lives. Oh, I have the clicker. So we know that language contact endangers languages. Historically, this took place in physical spaces and was generally due to colonialization, migration, etc. Today, similar forces are still at play, but now language contact can happen digitally, so it doesn't need any sort of physical proximity. So it's a bit more insidious. Instead, this language contact is driven by digital environments that systematically privilege dominant languages, especially English. We can see we've got 49.4% of the internet is in English, which is absolutely crazy. So these algorithms push users towards the most popular or the most useful languages at the expense of these less resource languages. So these dominant languages function sort of as digital bullies, and some academics actually call them bully languages because they just completely absorb all the attention, visibility, and just like the functionality in the interface for other languages to exist online and to thrive. This obviously really isn't accidental. Tech companies will always prioritize profit and global market share, so they only focus on the most commercially viable languages, leaving thousands unsupported and ignored. And this isn't just about whether you can find your language in Google Translate or another popular translation tool. It's about whether your language can be typed into the internet, whether it can be searched, or whether it can be spoken to a machine at all in the first place. So, for example, Africa's home to about 2,000 languages, and yet at this moment in time, none of the popular digital assistants like Siri, Alexa, Google Assistant offer any African languages. So that is a real problem. So this kind of means that these digitally disadvantaged language face a new sort of marginalization that we haven't seen before. So it's the potential for digital extinction. So this linguist, Andras Kornai, called it digital extinction, and he did a study in 2013 that estimated that only 5% of the world's languages will achieve what he calls digital vitality, so basically being able to exist and thrive on the internet, and the rest will face digital extinction. There just won't be any material or resources available in those languages. So this systemic exclusion kind of mirrors a broader trend. We could call it digital colonialism. So just as historic colonial powers seized labor and resources to enrich themselves, today's tech giants are extracting data, and this is often from communities that have very little say in how their data is used and how the tech operates. So we can kind of draw a direct parallel between historic colonialism and this kind of technological digital colonialism. So as an example, we could take Google and Meta building infrastructure like massive server farms in the global south, and they're not doing this to empower local communities. They're just trying to bring more users into their data ecosystems. So they're disregarding local needs, and they're just extracting the commodity, which today is data. So companies are constantly collecting, analyzing, and interpreting data so they can maintain a competitive edge. And that means that now personal data has an economic value. They can buy it and sell it. I really like this quote. This is from Peter Lucas-Jones. He's the CEO of a Maori media organization. Charlotte's going to talk in a minute about some cool stuff they're doing with AI. But he said that data is like land. If indigenous communities don't control their own data or digital presence, it's like being landless in the digital world. So speakers of indigenous and minority languages could be described as dispossessed in the digital landscape if they have no control over their own data or their digital presence in the world. So moving on to global tech hegemony, I want to talk a bit about that. So some people say that code is law. Tech companies don't just make tools and software, they kind of set the rules for using these softwares. So their algorithms shape what we see, how we speak, and how we interact online. So the rules are written in Silicon Valley, but then they're just applied everywhere, regardless of any linguistic or cultural context. And this matters because, like Charlotte mentioned with the keyboards, the tools we use have the potential to shape the language we use. And since these algorithms are determining which languages are supported, in many cases, the online infrastructure just simply doesn't have any space for anything other than a really narrow set of dominant languages, mostly English. So we can consider the use of Google Classroom in Kenyan schools or Microsoft software being rolled out in rural India, because these platforms were developed in English by English speakers for English speakers and then exported to a completely different linguistic environment while ignoring local languages altogether. So yeah, the result is a kind of technological hegemony, which means a global order where a very small handful of companies in mostly the global north control the entire digital ecosystem, And like I mentioned earlier, they don't just control it technically, but they kind of control it linguistically as well. So going back to digital colonialism, users in these countries are effectively locked into closed systems that prioritize this very small number of commercially viable languages. They offer no meaningful support for minority languages, and they kind of bias future developers towards these foreign closed-loop systems. So essentially, they stifle local innovation and reinforce dependency on these technologies from elsewhere. So they're kind of locked into tech that's built neither for nor by them, and there's no scope to accommodate local languages. And this, over time, can lead to the digital exclusion that I mentioned earlier, which has the potential to accelerate real-world decline. Because if your language isn't represented in the systems that shape the digital world, it can be pushed further to the margins of the real one. I'm going to give you back the clicker.
Okay, how many of you in here have used ChatGPT? So most people, okay. So when we're looking at emergent technology, we want to be looking at, what can it really do and what are we being told it can do? Is it as useful as everyone is telling us it is? And the thing that I notice most about things like ChatGPT, DeepSeek, Google Gemini, whatever, is we're being told it's going to do a lot of things. So if you Google AI in endangered languages, the vast majority of the results you're going to get straight away is that AI is going to save endangered languages. AI is going to solve climate change. AI is going to make it so we never have to work again. But also AI is going to take all of our jobs, and we're not going to be able to feed ourselves. So it's hard to tell, and we need to be aware of that when we're moving forward with this technology. Are we being realistic about what it can do and about the benefits it will provide? Are we looking at the downsides? And are we able to make an informed decision about this technology that is a product? So, of course, keyboards are a product, but they're a physical product. Once someone sold you a keyboard, they don't own anything that you write with it. Like, you can write whatever you want. It doesn't belong to the keyboard company. The internet, while it's becoming more and more commodified, we're going to a handful of sites that, like Leah says, just sell our data. It started as a service, as a communications tool. AI is and has always been a profit-making product. There are some open source ventures. They're still probably selling your data to make money to power all those servers. So we need to be kind of cognizant of that, and especially when we're looking at it to be a solution. So can AI save languages? Can it help communities to record, preserve, promote, revitalize their languages? And of course, there are ways it can. So here we're specifically talking about generative AI. We're talking a lot about text generating AI, so using large language models. And large language models have been used in linguistics for much longer than ChatGPT has been around, because they have some really obvious advantages. They store an awful lot of language. They can then pass all of that very quickly, much more easily than a human can do. And then these new ones can generate new content, so we can see where that would be useful. But this also has downsides, and specifically when we're talking about endangered minority languages, we have to be thinking about how the community wants to preserve them. How should they be kept? So when we're looking at, say, any endangered language, you'll often have small speaker groups that are speaking very distinct varieties. When we put the amount of data needed to feed an LLM into it, it's going to flatten that out, because it's just going to take all of it. For English, it's taken billions and billions of sentences off the internet. And when you talk to most of these chatbots, they're going to respond to you at first in a kind of standard Americanized English, because that's what it's figured is the middle. And you can tell it to do something else, but that's what it's going to do. We don't really want to do that with these languages that we're trying to help community groups to preserve, because they want to preserve the language as they speak it. So how do we feed it enough that it can be useful without flattening out the language? Because that's not really the goal. Then the second thing, very important, AI doesn't understand what you're telling it. It doesn't have context. It doesn't understand meaning that way. It is lining up tokens in a probability matrix. If it tells you an elephant is big and gray, it's not picturing a big gray elephant. It's putting those things in an order. So when you have, again, endangered minority languages that are so intrinsically tied to a culture that may also be retreating with them, we can't lose that context and that cultural nuance, because it's so important. So how do we sort of get around that? How do we fix that into the language? And then, of course, yeah, data ownership issues. Again, these are all very, very, very expensive to run. They are expensive to train. They're even more expensive when we all start using them. So how do we keep that data and that language and not take it from the people who speak it and commodify it, and ensure that they retain ownership of the languages that they own, because they do own them. And then the two bigger risks are the more that we are using like chatbots and things to produce language for us, the more we're valuing tech over people, and that's not what it should be when it comes to language. Language is a human communication tool. It is intrinsically tied to the fact that we are human beings, and if we pretend that a chatbot has that same sense as us, it's really devaluing what our language is. So how do we ensure that the speakers are kept to the same value of technology, and we're not going, well, this is cheaper and this is easier, so why would I bother to talk to this community who this is their language? And then, of course, climate impact. So a few days ago, MIT released a new article where they tried to estimate the amount of energy that something like ChatGPT, and they use several different models, use. And I say estimate because a lot of these companies will not give us the information about how much energy their models are using. So they can work out how much the GPU is using and then sort of double it to get how much the CPU and fans are using on top. So that's how much energy each interaction that you have with a chatbot costs. And what they found is that, I think it was with Facebook's models, Meta's models, if you give it a simple question and answer, very, very simple text prompt, it's like running your microwave for about 3 seconds. If you get it to generate a picture, it's like running your microwave for about 5 seconds. If you give it a more complicated text prompt, it's like running your microwave for 8 seconds. If you get it to generate video, which some of the new ones are doing, 15 seconds of video, it's like running your microwave for an hour. And if we're all doing this, if the people at OpenAI are saying ChatGPT is getting 1 million requests a day, that's a lot of energy. And we know they're using a lot of energy because companies like Meta and Microsoft are pushing for more nuclear power plants. OpenAI are pushing for more servers. And we know as well that they're not going to go with wind and solar energy because it's not super reliable, and these servers need to constantly be running and constantly cooled for this technology to work. How is that going to affect climate change? And particularly when climate change has a very marked effect on speakers of endangered and minority languages. If you look at areas like Vanuatu and Papua New Guinea, they have a massive density of languages. In Vanuatu, it's something like every 7,000 people speak a different language. There are so many languages. They're also very affected by climate change. And as soon as they become climate refugees, it's not like you take them all in one scoop and put them in a place they can still speak their language. They're moved, they're scattered, they have language contact, and they lose their languages. And we're going to see that happening more and more. Obviously, it's not like this is the only thing doing it, but it is a harm we can see coming. So it's one we should kind of work out how to prevent. But there are community initiatives that are being very useful. So Peter Lucas-Jones, who Leah mentioned earlier, he runs a Maori media company. He found a load of archives of old Maori recordings and wanted to create a voice recognition tool because there wasn't a voice recognition tool for Maori. So he fed it into some kind of large language model, found that because the recordings were old, it wouldn't recognize them. So he taught other Maori speakers to categorize and tag the entries. They fed them into the machine, corrected mistakes, and now he has a voice recognition tool that is 92% accurate, which I think is more accurate than Siri is with like my accent. So it's great. Another one is Jared Coleman. He's a computer science professor in the US. He speaks the Paiute language. I could be wrong. But he found recordings of his great-great-grandfather and found that he didn't actually understand as much as he thought. So he took the archives he found, and taught himself the language, but found that when he wanted to create a computer, like technological tool, he didn't have enough to feed the machine. So he created what's called a large language model assisted rules-based technology translation tool. So essentially what he did is he, instead of just feeding it sentences, he fed it rules. So he said, this is the word for he, and this is the word for drinks, and this is the word for water. And then he asked it, how do you say he will drink water? And then they corrected it, and instead of, so like what ChatGPT will do, you ask it something and it'll just feed you whatever back. It could be wrong, it's making stuff up. he made it so that it wouldn't give you an answer if it didn't know it. So everything it gives you should be accurate, and if it doesn't know, it will say, I don't know, and you can go and look it up. So he's hoping he'll have a tool where you can learn a language through AI, because he's been very specific in how he's using it. It's not just feeding it information. And this will be useful for more of these languages that don't have enough resources to feed the machine. If there are ways to do that without having to scrape the whole of the internet where these languages are disadvantaged, there might be methods we can use. And there are also plenty of other projects. IBM researchers are working with speakers in Brazil. Google's researchers are working with other communities. But the point is, these projects are not necessarily designed to be profitable. When we say AI must serve speakers, not profits, it's not to say, you shouldn't ever make a profit. It's just that it shouldn't be profits first. Put the speakers first. Profits may well follow, because there's going to be a market for these things. There's going to be plenty of Maori people who need to use voice recognition tools. If you can't see, you're going to need them. So if you put the speakers first, you're more likely to, make something of it. And then the last line, nothing for us without us, that's from the Los Pinos Declaration in Mexico from 2020. So when they were talking about the decade of indigenous languages, which we're still in, and their declaration was that, if you're working on these community projects, work with the community, ask them what they want, work towards their goals. You may have a different idea and they may want to take it, but if you work with them, it's going to obviously work a lot better than just taking it and doing something for yourself that they never wanted.
Okay, so to conclude, we ask what can be done. So first of all, the web should be made more accessible. It shouldn't just be for a very narrow set of dominant languages. As kind of language learners, we think we should aim to work with speakers of any language, not just the endangered ones, because no matter your overall goals, there should always be an aim to interact with people and not the mimic that is AI, because tech doesn't save a language, people do. And many indigenous languages are still, and dialects and different variants are still dismissed as not being proper languages. And most hearing people aren't even aware that the world's 200 approximately sign languages are like fully formed languages, like linguistic systems. So it's kind of concerning to see essentially robots lauded as speakers when we still fail to recognize so many living spoken languages as legitimate. So these technologies obviously have immense power to connect people, preserve languages, and revitalize them, but without inclusive infrastructure, thoughtful design, and community-led development, these technologies also risk contributing to the digital decline and potentially erasure of a lot of languages. So, yeah. That's it. Thank you. Oh, yeah, I'm coming.
Okay, so our first question, I'm going to come over here because I can't see. Since many written languages are struggling to be represented online, are TikTok or YouTube helping to offset that a bit by using their spoken languages online? I would say, yeah, the prevalence of especially short video format is going to be more helpful. I think there's definitely, I don't know about community-based initiatives, but there's like individuals that are doing a lot for their languages. There's, I can't remember her name, but there's a woman who, in COVID, she started doing a Scots word of the day, and she would do that every day, and she writes poetry in Scots, and she's really done a lot to promote the language, like even on her own. Obviously, it shouldn't be down to an individual, but I can't see why this wouldn't work. And obviously, we can record that now. The problem is also future-proofing the recordings that we make, making sure they're accessible, but that's really one for linguists to deal with. But yeah. And then we have, how is UTalk using AI?
We aren't. So everyone that all of our translations and everyone that we record, so their voices, they're all native speakers. So we do work with native speakers of any language we work with, except for languages like Latin and ancient Greek, for example. But we would then still speak with, experts, very high level speakers. So yeah.
Yeah, we don't have any intention, as far as we know, of using it, because it also just wouldn't be useful. Regardless of anything else, it wouldn't really help with what we're doing.
Yeah. So yeah, we do try and work with the community as much as possible when we're adding new languages to the app, which I think is a really positive thing.
Okay. Realistically, how many of those 95% of digitally endangered languages can be saved? It's not that if they're digitally disadvantaged, they're going to not be spoken. That we're talking about two different domains. So they may be digitally disadvantaged because a lot of their speakers just aren't online, in which case they're probably doing fine or doing whatever, but acting differently out in the real world. Yeah. It's about sort of making sure there is this space where people don't just have to go through English and therefore make the problem worse. So it's kind of two different areas, but there's a lot we can do to make that easier.
Yeah, because being digitally disadvantaged doesn't actually affect the number of human speakers, but it does cause a lot of problems. And if they're having to switch to a more dominant language to use the internet, then that's just really not ideal and shouldn't ideally happen. Okay. How does you talk?
Okay, sorry.
See ya.
What can the average person do in order to help solve this problem? I mean, look at the languages near you, look at what community efforts, look at the languages you're learning as well. Like, they may not be near you, and see what you can get involved in. It's quite interesting. I think someone spoke to me last year or the year before, and he said, I don't know many languages, I don't know this language, I don't know how I could help. But he had loads of technical skills. If you have other skills as well that are outside of language learning, that would also be helpful for a lot of these projects. A lot of it is just a case of helping to record and preserve languages. A lot of the work they do in the Australian government does is recording their Indigenous languages, because that's the main issue, is that they're going to sort of die out before we get records of them. And so looking into initiatives that can help, either your local governments or community groups are probably the most useful, and then kind of go from there. But just approaching speakers is usually the right way to go, and they'll tell you whether or not they want your help. So it's kind of straightforward.
How does UTalk support Indigenous and endangered languages, and how can language learners evaluate language learning apps to know they're using people-first tech? That is a really good question. So it should be, I mean, I don't know if they do, but I feel like it should be declared if a language learning app is using AI, because it's really important. So yeah, I would aim to use ones that are, that say they don't use AI. We support Indigenous and endangered languages, first of all, by kind of preservation, because we record a pretty large corpora of words and phrases in that language. So that's really useful. We then make it available for anyone to learn. We also have worked with communities to grant them, extended access to the app, so it's not like their language is always being sold back to them. So for example, on the island of Jersey, we partnered with the local government, didn't we, to make sure that everyone could access the app. And we're also talking to, working with people at the University of Lima to kind of give people access to Peruvian languages that we might record in the future for free in certain areas of Peru. So that's something we're looking into. And yeah, we also work directly with native speakers and try and involve as many people as possible, whether that's, we've got the translators, we've got the people doing the recordings, we've got affiliates promoting the language. So yeah, we try and involve as much of the community as possible. Okay. Do you have anything to add?
No, I'm looking at the next question.
Oh yeah.
Do you want to comment on Duolingo's recent decision? So I do our marketing. From a marketing perspective, I think it was very poorly handled. Duolingo is an interesting tool because their CEO has been very open about the fact that it's about getting people on the app more than it is about actually teaching you anything. And I think that if it helps you do something every day and it pushes you into more language learning, then it's doing a good job of helping to teach, because that's important as well. But I think as when you use a chatbot, check what you're learning, because there are inaccuracies. And there are inaccuracies in every tool. People have found inaccuracies in what we've done, and we work with translators who are native speakers. Always check what you're learning anyway, but if you know it's AI powered, I would say be especially cautious, because it's not also that every model's making it smarter. OpenAI just released another model that was found to be worse in some ways and was hallucinating more. So you're going to have to be very aware of what you're learning. You can't just trust these companies, any company, to do exactly what it's saying, which is annoying because we have so many companies selling us so much stuff, it's hard to check it all. But if you're generally interacting with speakers, whether that's in a case of like you're speaking to them or you're reading things or you're listening to things, you should be able to pick up the mistakes. But yeah, I do think it was mismanaged.
I think these two questions are connected. So what did you mean by bully languages? How does content in one language push out content in other languages? And do search engines play a role in endangering languages online because they make it more difficult to find content in these rare languages? I think the answer to both of those is algorithms. So I think, like I mentioned earlier, these search engines will push you towards the most popular, the most used languages. And they work that out for themselves, and we don't have much control over that. So you can see in the Google search ranking that certain languages, certain sites come up far, far more. So yeah, algorithms are the answer for that. And what do I mean by bully languages? I essentially mean that these languages are kind of taking up the space, and the functionality. They'll look at it and say, oh, we've got all this material in English, that's all we need. We've got all of this stuff, but actually it's not for everyone. So yeah, that's what we mean by bully languages.
Does you talk? Oh no, what's happening?
Oh, where's it gone? I think we did the top one, didn't we?
Yeah. So what can we, the general public, do in order to make more languages achieve digital vitality? It's difficult. It's one of those questions. It's like the climate change question. What can you as an individual do versus what are large organizations, governments, and corporations responsible for? It's tricky to say. What you can try and do, I would say what you could try and do is like produce more content in languages and use languages more. But as you said about search engines, they are optimized, so they are designed to put certain types of results first. I think that's why when I said I looked up AI and endangered languages, and it brought up a lot of things of like, AI will save endangered languages. I don't know if they're the most read articles or if they're just the ones that the search engine wanted to produce to me because of how search engine optimization works. And that changes all the time. So it's really difficult to say because you're fighting an uphill battle with people that have a lot more money and power than you. What you can do, I guess, is to use it in your network and just push it that way. But individually, it's very hard. It's very much an uphill battle. When you have companies, say, that are doing things the way you don't like, tell them about it. Or if they're doing things that are good, tell them about it. That's the thing that's going to make them change is like profit and loss and getting feedback, because that's kind of what they care about. So yeah, not a lot, but also if you work together, we can do it.
I think the answer for these two is the same as well. So I found that some chatbots speak Welsh badly but are okay with major languages. Is this a cost issue in training? My experience of the chatbots is that it's fine with major languages, but very poor with minority languages such as Welsh. Is this an isolated experience? No, it's not. And it's because these minority languages like Welsh are not so much Welsh. There's a bit more. There's more content on the internet in Welsh than maybe for some of these other minority endangered languages because the British government has to have Welsh on all its websites. But yeah, basically it's because there's just not enough content for the AI to scrape. So it just can't learn or put together, sentences in the way that it can when it's scraping an absolutely huge language like English, where there's just loads of resources, loads of content for it to pull from. So yeah, I guess it is an issue in training because it just doesn't have the material to be trained in the same way as major languages. Yeah. So yeah.
Okay, does UTalk also offer language tandems with native speakers with languages that are not widely represented, African languages, for instance? So it's not that we do language tandems, it's that the app has words and phrases in the language on it. But yeah, when it comes to African languages, we don't have anywhere near the 2,000, but we do have quite a few. And the way we built, and this is where we hit one of the limitations. So the way the app works is we have a corpus of about 2,500 words and phrases. And we originally built that in English, and then we have versions like French and Spanish to send to translators. And we give that to the translators, and they translate it, and then we put that into the app. And what that means is that you don't have to speak English, French, German, Spanish to learn a language. You can speak Zulu and learn Greenlandic if you want to. But to have that flexibility means that we lost some flexibility with the language in the corpus, because now it's very hard to change it. And we found that we're getting an Indigenous Australian language translated at the minute, Warlpiri, and half the words we have in English they just don't have. They just use the English word. So we're not getting the whole authentic experience of that language because it's very difficult to change our technology because we built our technology on major languages. And that's a perfect example of how, yes, our technology is helpful, but it's also not actually flexible enough to assist in every use case with how we want it to work. And that's something you have to think about and adapt as you go. I think the 7,000 languages worked with transparent language, and in 2021 they did a talk about the Michif language at the Women in Language event, and they talked about the same issue. Like, they have the same kind of structure we do, in that it's the structure's kind of built and you kind of plug a language into it so that you can get those languages, you can capture them quickly, but it means that you lose out on some of the nuance of the language because you can't adapt for every little thing. And we're trying to find ways around that by adding sort of new topics, but to add them across all languages is just going to take time. So it's about achieving that balance between something that's going to work really effectively to help record and promote a language, but also is going to capture the essence of it in a useful way.
Yeah. Very well said.
Oh,
Ooh.
since sign languages aren't written, do you think there's a way to get them more recognized online since the algorithms won't pick on them as well? So there have been some sign language initiatives with LLMs, like with AI. So there have been people in the deaf community building tools to essentially like voice recognition, but for signs. So they're building tools so that their signs will be recognized. So within the community, there are definite efforts. But yeah, I mean, sign languages aren't represented in text online for the most part anyway. There is sign writing, but it's not widely used. And it exists, but it's just not widely used. Like, deaf people write how they write. But yeah, there are ways, really interesting ways in which AI are being used by the community, and that's what we want to keep going. But generally, yeah, they're just not really represented, apart from, say, YouTube and TikTok online.
Thank you.